Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today it is time for another installment of my history of horror series that I'm doing here on my channel, where I tell you all about a horror movie icon while turning myself into that icon. Today we are going to be talking about the man, the myth, the legend, the real person who inspired these movies, Freddy Krueger. I have a teeny little Funko Pop of him. He is well, I have Jason and I have Damien from The Lost Boys as well, but I have Freddy right here. So we are going to be talking about the 9 movies that comprise the Nightmare on Elm Street series, the TV series, the books, and the comic books, all inspired by Wes Craven's character, Freddy Krueger. So let's get started talking about these movies. So before we talk about any of the movies, let's talk about the premise of the character of Freddy, because that's really what the series is about. Freddy is a killer of children who is caught by the children's parents that he has murdered, and they decide they're going to trap him in the school, and they actually burn him alive, I think through a kiln, like they get the kiln to explode or something. But they burn him alive to kind of avenge their children that he murdered. But there is a demon inside the kiln that basically tells him how he can be reborn, and he basically sells his soul so that he can never die and come back and seek his revenge. So when he does that, he comes back and kills teenagers in their dreams and kind of torments them psychologically until he's able to kill them. Now, the first movie came out in 1984 and was produced by New Line Cinema and directed by horror icon himself, Wes Craven, and that was the Nightmare on Elm Street. The premise of this movie is that there is one survivor who defeats Freddy in the real world, and that is how basically all these movies kind of work. There's that one lone survivor who figures out how to kill him, who figures out how to get rid of him in some way. And this first movie is the one that features Johnny Depp and was kind of like the catalyst to his career. This is a really gory, slashery, quintessentially 80s horror film. There's a lot of blood and a lot of scenes where like you can tell it's a mannequin and things like that. However, the transformation for Freddy took 3 hours. So every day that they were filming, it was 3 hours of makeup for the main person in the film, and his name escapes me, but it took him 3 hours to get into character, and it actually wasn't makeup. A lot of it was big SFX pieces. There was a neck piece, a kind of cowl that went all the way up around the head to create the burn, and then a series of smaller prosthetics for the nose, mouth, eyes, and such. But this character did not just come out of Wes Craven's twisted mind. This came from a real person who Wes Craven was said to have seen in a felt brown fedora, much like Freddy's, outside of his house when he was a child. Late at night, he looked out, made eye contact with the creepy man, and then looked away. And then after a bit of time, he went back, and the man was still outside his window staring at him, smiling and waving. And this man, I guess, was found to actually be a child killer, so he based the character of Freddy on this man. There's a lot of lore around the character as well. There's a place that's not too far from me where it said that the man who inspired Freddy is buried. But I'm not sure if that is true or not. The next Nightmare on Elm Street movie came out in 1985, so right after the other one, right into the next year, and this was Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Freddy returns to the old house that he has the survivor from the first movie's old house, and he is there for revenge on the original victims. However, they are not living there anymore. But Freddy is able to possess another boy in order to carry out his killings, and that boy is saved by his girlfriends when they perform some kind of exorcism and basically take Freddy's spirit and send it back to hell. So in this movie, Freddy is just a spirit, but you still see him in the dreams. He still comes alive. He's still the one doing the killing, just through somebody else's body. And I'm not gonna lie, some of these movie plots are very convoluted, but 1980s horror was very different than the genre now, where it's much more psychological and the SFX are much better and stuff like that. Like they're much more, I don't want to say cheesy, but they've kind of become cheesy. But at the time, they were, you know, A1 box office gold. In 1987, we have Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. Freddy is coming back again, and this time he has a plan to kill all of the children of Elm Street so that they cannot cause him issues anymore. However, through the torment that he causes, the kids are actually institutionalized, and the original survivor from the first movie is a psychiatrist who comes back to help because she obviously knows how to deal with Freddy because she is the one who killed him in the first place. And there are a set of dream warriors. These are all the people who are dedicated to taking Freddy out, and they try to get rid of him. Of course, there's always speculation in horror movies when you kill off the main character of are they really dead or not, and that leads us to movie number 4, which is Nightmare on Elm Street: The Dream Master, which came out in 1988. The thing with this sequels that's kind of different compared to some of the other movies we talked about is that they are all like a year apart, like they are in fairly quick succession. However, they were still very successful. These weren't remakes, they were sequels. Remakes of this movie did not come until the late 2000s, but we'll talk about that in a second. So in the 4th installment in this series, Freddy's spirit is released inadvertently, and our main character transfers her Dream Warrior powers to another person, and it actually causes people to die. Freddy is able to come back and kill others because of this, but in the end, all the souls of all of the children that Freddy has killed come back, and they are able to vanquish him and kind of get their revenge from beyond the grave. This one seemed kind of interesting to me, like the ending anyway. However, I have not watched this one, so I do not know how well done it is, but it does sound like an interesting premise and very different for horror. Like usually once the victims are killed off, it's kind of over for them, but them coming back and kind of avenging themselves, I think, is a really cool concept. Then in 1989, we have the 5th installment in the series called Dream Child. Once again, Freddy is resurrected, and Freddy's mother, Spirit, is introduced, and she reveals how Freddy was conceived. I won't get too much into it because it could be triggering for some people, but basically she was a nun at an insane asylum and was locked in a room with 100 I believe they said maniacs and murderers, I believe is kind of the line they use, and they all beat her and assault her, and that is basically how Freddy is conceived. If you want more details on it, just Google it. Google's your friend on that one, I guess. Basically, through them learning how Freddy was conceived, they can kind of figure out how to take him out. Once again, Freddy's spirit possesses somebody else, so he is within a host, but the host is able to figure out how to use Freddy's powers against him and actually exorcise him from himself and send Freddy back to where he came from. Then we have movie number 6, which is called Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. This came out in 1991, so a little bit of a break between the 5th and 6th movies. But basically, Freddy decides he wants to create a new Elm Street. He is going to come back and go on a killing spree, and more of his background is revealed, how he was conceived, how he was bullied in school because kids found out the way he was conceived. It explains the origin of his powers, how he got them, how he's able to torment people in their dreams, and also Freddy comes back to the real world and is vanquished, because when he is in the dream world, he is most powerful and they can't kill him, but if he is in the real world, then it is a very different story. In 1994, we have movie number 7 called New Nightmare. This is basically a frame story. It is a fiction set in a fiction of a fiction of a fiction of a fiction, very Inception-esque if you think about it. This is all about Freddy's spirit becoming self-aware, and the fact that he's in movies, so it's supposed to be like Freddy's a real person, but he's in the movies. He realizes he's in the movie and he wants to make the movies a reality, so he wants his spirit to be let out into the real world. It's kind of confusing to explain. I think it's something kind of to watch, but basically they bring the actress back who was the original first survivor and have her pose as the role one last time so that they can get rid of Freddy forever. And she burns him in his dream world, so basically recreating his death in the real world, in the dream world, and getting rid of him once again. Now in 2003, movie number 8 came out, and this is probably one of the most talked about horror films, at least at the time, and that was Freddy versus Jason. We are going to talk about Friday the 13th and Jason Voorhees in a different video. That's going to be the next episode of History of Horror, so they kind of go together, but Freddy did come first, so I'm doing him first. But basically, Freddy is no longer feared in this world. Jason is like the most scary, and Freddy pretends to be Jason's mom and causes him to go do the killings. That will make more sense when we talk about Jason. But basically he will do whatever his mother says. So Freddy poses as his mother in Jason's dreams, tells him he needs to go kill, and basically uses Jason as proxy. But then eventually the two come together. They find out what was happening. Jason figures out that he was posing as his mother, and Freddy and him fight in 2 locations. They fight in the dream world, but they also fight at Crystal Lake. And there's no clear winner of this because the way the movie ends, Jason is at the bottom of the lake again, holding Freddy's head, but then Freddy's head winks and laughs, so it's kind of like his spirit is still alive, and Jason rises out of the lake. So we don't really know who wins, and I don't know that there was ever a sequel to this movie. I could not find one anyway. However, it is kind of just a gory slasher what if situation. There's not a whole lot of plot to it. It's mainly it's just a blood fest. And after Freddy vs. Jason, there really wasn't any Freddy movies again until 2010 when the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street was made. So this is the 9th movie involving Freddy. Freddy it's kind of like an extension of the original story. Freddy stalks teens that he has previously abused, and he starts killing them off because they have started telling their parents what happened to them and what he did to them. But he leaves his favorite child for last, and she ends up falling into a permanent sleep so that Freddy can keep her in his dream world. He doesn't want to kill her. He wants to keep her as kind of like a trophy, or as more of a possession. It's very creepy and weird, but her friends are able to wake her up and burn Freddy's remains of the body that was actually his actual remains that were burned when the parents found out, and kill him forever. Now, there was actually a change made in this movie. In the other Nightmare on Elm Streets, Freddy is kind of meant to be semi-funny and a dark, twisted humor kind of way. There's a lot of jokes that he kind of cracks. In this one, they cut all of that out. Freddy was meant to be sadistic, scary, closer a real-life serial killer than a caricature of a killer. So this movie, actually, I remember the trailers for this, was very scary, stuck to kind of the same feeling, the dreams and everything, but was definitely more of scary, spooky, freaked me out a little bit. Yeah. So even with 9 movies, you would think that would be enough Freddy content for everyone. However, because the first movie was so very popular, in 1988 there was actually a TV series where Freddy was the host. Now, he wasn't in every episode. It was an anthology horror series, so every episode the story was different. However, episodes, Freddy would pop up. He would be I believe he was the main character in the first 2 episodes, and then it kind of branched off into other things, but it got people hooked in by having him be the narrator, the host, the kind of very much, it was the Twilight Zone. So you kind of had that opening scene where he would be talking, but there was so much popularity around this movie that there were book adaptations of Nightmare on Elm Street, which is like the reverse of every other movie character we've talked about, where they were a book then a movie. This was a movie then a book. There was comic books made. They're all different kinds of things revolving around Nightmare on Elm Street. His character just gets more and more sinister and creepy and scary and spooky as time goes on, and I think that's what makes him such a lasting icon of horror, because you know he's just gonna get spookier and scarier every single time. So that's it for this episode of History of Horror, talking about Freddy Krueger. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you enjoyed the look. I have had this costume in my closet forever, so I am so happy to be able to put it to use finally. The claw, the hat, the sweater, all of it. I love it. So I hope you guys did too. If you did, make sure you subscribe, because we are not done with this series yet. Not next week, but the week after. I will be back on the every other week schedule for History of Horror. So we'll be talking about Jason, which I'm very excited to do for you guys. So that is it for me, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.